New Light Through an Old Window, a short story by Paul McCann. He went back to the place he grew up in, checked out the town. The school had closed its door, but the old building still stood. He found an open door at the back and he went inside the classroom where he was taught how to read and write. One or two of the old desks were still in the classroom. As he wiped away the thick dust on top of the desk, he was amazed to find that his initials, FC, were still gouged into the timber. On the windows, dirt was layered in thick crusts. There were bird droppings, mud, dye from some fallen leaves, and an old copper still shimmering around some of the inkwells. A dim light pierced the quiet classroom. The silence was broken by a mouse that scurried across the floor. He jumped, and just for a moment, he almost heard the teacher call out his name. "Francis Clancy, sit down and read from your book." He wiped some of the dust off the seat and he sat down. Looking up at the cobwebs on the ceiling, he thought of the years that had passed and wondered where all his friends had gone. He remembered how they had always commented about his calling in life. If only he could tell them now that they were right. Francis had become a brother in a religious order whose apostolate was teaching. He wondered about the old school and how it closed, and how all of the years had passed, and how it would be so nice to have some of his school friends reunited again, and if it could only reopen. Time passed slowly and he sat there, thinking about all these things. He spent a moment or two in silent prayer and mentioned the names of those who he could remember. At the close of the prayer, he handed over all of those he had forgotten to God, and he prayed for their intentions. It was time to leave the old classroom and return back to life. So Francis walked out the door, leaving his memories behind in the dust of what used to be. Down through the town he walked, looking around the old buildings. Eventually he came to the church where he was baptized and had made all his sacraments. Just like the old school, the church too was now closed. He made his way to the foot of the steps and walked up to the front door of the building and pushed it open. To his surprise, inside was a commune of hippies living. He wandered in and introduced himself to some of them. The first person he met was a girl who was carrying an unborn child in her womb. He smiled at her and said, "Hello, my name is Francis. I used to go to church here. It's been a long time since I was here, and I'm so glad to see that the old place is still doing what it was intended to do." "What?" came the reply. Francis responded quickly and quietly. "To give shelter to all those within its walls. Thank you for your welcome." A couple of pigeons who were perched on the beams near the roof took flight, and in doing so, they glided through the air, dislodging some of the dust from the rafters, and they made their way then through the open window. Francis stood there and laughed for a moment. Some of the other residents came over to meet Francis. A young man reached out his hand and said, "Hello, I'm Lee. Sometimes we tie message to the legs. We write poetry and messages of peace and love, and hope the flight might bring them to somebody out there who read the words we have written and send." Francis replied, "Nice to meet you, Lee. I'm Francis. You know what I think, my friend? Well, there are so many people in the world today that need to hear messages just like that. I really hope that the pigeons get your message through." Lee seemed very taken by what Francis had said, and he asked, "Would you like to stay with us for a while, Francis?" I'd love to, but I must return to the monastery tonight, said Francis. Oh, well, if you change your mind, the offer's still open. Francis took a long look around at the inside of the old building, and then he walked out to the main street. He noticed outside on the street there was a pigeon walking around in a circle. The pigeon had a little piece of paper tied to its leg, and Francis placed his hands around the bird and took the note and read it silently to himself. This message of peace comes to you from a pigeon. You can crush the bird or crumple up the paper in your hands. Your choice. But I'd like to think that you could spread this peace on to others and let the bird go. Francis took a pen from his top pocket and he wrote another message. May the peace you find take wings and fly to others, that they may know it was you who sent it. He tied the message to the pigeon's leg and carried the bird all the way to the town before letting it go. The bird refused to fly, and for a while it just strutted around on the ground. And then in the blink of an eye, it took to the sky and flew away. Francis walked to the bus stop and waited for the bus to come. But he had spent so much time in the old church that he had missed the last bus. So he decided to accept the offer and stay the night with the hippie commune. He walked back to the commune and he spoke to the sky. Then he went inside the building and he sought out Lee, who was happy to see him, and Sky came over and stood behind and said quietly, So, you're going to stay with us tonight, huh? Oh, hello again. Yeah, I missed the bus. So if it's all right, I'll find a place to lie down. Sure, yeah. Hey, I'll come with you, sit with you for a while. I should have been, preparing dinner half an hour ago. Lee walked away and Sky started to smile. She looked at him and said, Brother, I'll call you brother. So, what do you think of this place, huh? And she just turned away and walked. Francis watched her wander up the old staircase to the choir loft above the front entrance. And he walked up there and joined her and looked down into the heart of the building. He saw a young man sitting down on a wooden floor where the altar used to be. He had a guitar, started to play, and was joined by two girls with flutes. Their soft music was pleasant to listen to. Across the floor, three girls danced to the melodies, and some young children were playing catch with a ball. Francis took a pencil from his pocket and he drew a sketch of the scene below on a sheet of paper. He always carried art supplies just in case something captured his heart. Francis was a gifted artist who could have made a lot of money if he had a mind to. As it turned out, he had another calling in life and walked along that road. As twilight fell, so did the rain, straight through the roof. There were leaks in the old roof, and a group of hippies placed buckets and pots on the floor below to catch some of the rainwater. Francis began to think about fixing the old place up. He had the idea that maybe there was a possibility that he could get permission to restore the building back to its original state. When he finished the sketch, he returned back down to the hall from the choir loft. And as he looked around the building, he could see a lot of needy work needed to be done. He couldn't get the thought out of his head about restoring the old church, so he started to pray about that. He wondered if it was God's will that he had been brought to this place for that reason. He wandered around the hippies. He somehow felt as if he was connected to them. Sky brought him some food and drink as it started to get dark. A number of candles were lit all around and a heavenly light flickered through the building. Memories streamed back to Francis about his childhood days when evening church services was a regular part of the Sun Valley parish community. He remembered the novenas with the Stations of the Cross and other choir practices that were happening then, and evening masses on holy days of obligation, winter evenings with the wax therapy, as it was often called. The church had always been a busy place when he was a child. The church had always been a major part of his life. There was a welcome still in the old building, and after he ate and sketched some more happy faces of the group, he handed them on to the people. They were very impressed with his work, and each picture was hung around the walls of the building. It was nice to see his works on display, and there were people making comments about each one in great detail, and they all showed a great deal of interest in sharing the talent of this artist who had come into their midst. Francis was asked many questions about who he was and what he was doing there. He told them that he was a religious brother and asked them questions about their lifestyle. He began to understand their free spirit in the world, but not of the world. They were gentle souls who were not lost, but together on an island where they could see the blindness of the world around them. Their lifestyle was a step away from what was considered an acceptable way to live in society. The music was still echoing from the place where the altar once sat, and suddenly Francis felt an urge to pray about the place where he stood. Suddenly, light shone through to where it was once dark. He smiled and asked if anyone wanted to join him in prayer, and someone said, "Right, how we pray?" "Close your eyes and say hello to God," Francis replied. "Can he hear?" Francis said. "Yeah, he's always there with you." As Francis started to pray, so did everyone else, until a beautiful noise transcended up through the old tin roof, straight to heaven above. Francis realized there and then that God was at work. An answer had come, and a new parish community was being formed right before his very eyes. Francis stayed up all that night and continued to pray, and in the morning light he asked how many would consider becoming Catholics. The answer he got was almost unanimous. He wrote down each of their names and had them put a sign or write their name or signature beside that, with a commitment to become a Catholic. The list of names were numbered over 100 people. He told everyone on the strength of this that he would present a letter to the bishop of the diocese informing him about the promise of a new parish in Sun Valley. It seemed now that things were in God's hands as he caught the bus and made his way to the bishop's house. He walked in like a man on a mission, hanging on to the hope that the bishop would say yes. That day the bishop made a journey to the old church at Sun Valley, and he met some of the hippie commune. A closed door had now been reopened. Francis had been a tool in the restoration of the old church. "Hey brother, where are you going?" Skye said as the bishop and Francis left. "To seek approval," Francis said. "How long will it take?" Skye asked as Francis asked the same question to the bishop. "In this new freedom I have seen a new light through an old window," the bishop replied. Francis smiled and waited for something else. "I'm going to appoint a priest and 3 brothers to the new parish of St. Francis in Sun Valley. Work to restore the building will begin immediately." Francis broke down in tears of joy and promised to do everything he could to make good Catholics out of the hippie community. The news of the miracle in Sun Valley spread through the Catholic grapevine, and donations started to arrive. These funds that were provided were used to build a new church, and within a few weeks there were people who were coming with other donations, and they wanted to remain anonymous. 3 years later, crowds made their way to Mass at St. Francis Catholic Church, and children were once again back at the old school that had been shut. God's grace was alive and well in Sun Valley once again. That's the end of the story.